Picture this. You fall asleep next to your wife on a Tuesday night in October. Everything is normal. The kids are breathing softly in the next room. Tomorrow, you'll wake up early for work at the docks, same as always. But when dawn breaks, your wife won't wake up. Her skin has turned cold. Dark, apple-sized swellings have erupted under her arms overnight, oozing a mixture of blood and pus. Your 7-year-old daughter is already crying from the other room, not from sadness, but from the fever burning through her small body. By Thursday afternoon, you're the only one left alive in your house. By Friday, you're loading their bodies onto a cart with 15 others from your street. By Saturday, you feel the first tickle in your throat. This wasn't a nightmare. This was October 1348 in the city of Florence. And this exact scenario played out in thousands of homes across hundreds of cities for nearly 5 straight years. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it deleted them. It erased entire family trees. It turned bustling cities into silent graveyards. It made people question whether God had simply given up on humanity. And here's the terrifying part. Nobody knew what it was, where it came from, or how to stop it. Today, we're going to trace the path of the greatest killer in human history, from a handful of sick rodents in the mountains of Central Asia to the complete reshaping of Western civilization. This is the story of how half of Europe died in less time than it takes to get a college degree. So let's go back to the beginning. To understand the horror of what was about to happen, you first need to understand what was about to be destroyed. The year is 1340. Europe is not the disease-ridden, backward medieval wasteland you've seen in movies. Actually, it's the opposite. This is the peak of the High Middle Ages, and it's spectacular. Thanks to something called the medieval warm period, the weather has been almost perfect for nearly 300 years. Summers are long and warm. Winters are mild. Harvests are incredible, year after year after year. And when people have enough food, something magical happens. They have children. Lots of them. Between 1000 and 1340 AD, Europe's population has nearly doubled. We're talking about a baby boom that would make the 1950s jealous. Cities that once fit comfortably inside old Roman walls are now bursting at the seams. Paris has over 200,000 people crammed into winding streets. Florence is approaching 120,000. London is exploding northward past its ancient boundaries. Walk through any major European city in 1340 and your senses are assaulted. The smell of fresh bread mixing with horse manure and tanning leather. The sound of hammers on anvils, merchants shouting prices in 6 different languages, church bells ringing every hour. The sight of massive Gothic cathedrals rising higher than anyone thought possible. Notre Dame, Chartres, Westminster Abbey. These aren't just buildings, they're statements. They say, "We are powerful, we are sophisticated, we are blessed by God." And the world? It's connected in ways it hasn't been since Rome fell 900 years ago. This is the age of the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. The descendants of Genghis Khan control the largest land empire in human history, stretching from Korea to the doorstep of Europe. And say what you want about Mongol brutality, but they are excellent for business. A merchant in Venice can now order silk directly from China. Persian spices flow through safe, Mongol-protected trade routes. Ideas, inventions, and yes, diseases move across Asia with unprecedented speed. The medieval world has created its own version of the Internet, the Silk Road. It's a vast, interconnected web of caravans, ships, and trading posts moving goods from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. Marco Polo has already made his famous journey to the court of Kublai Khan and returned with tales that sound like fantasy. Venetian merchants are getting rich beyond imagination. The University of Paris is the intellectual center of the known world. Italian bankers are inventing modern finance. English wool is clothing half the continent. This is a civilization on the rise, a golden age. But here's the thing about golden ages. They're fragile. Because while Europe is celebrating its prosperity, completely oblivious to what's coming, something is stirring 5,000 miles away in the windswept grasslands of Central Asia. Something small. Something ancient. Something that's about to hitch a ride on those same trade routes that made Europe rich. And when it arrives, it will kill with an efficiency that would make modern biological warfare look gentle by comparison. The steppes of Central Asia in the 1330s are one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Imagine an ocean of grass stretching to the horizon in every direction. No trees, no shelter. Just endless, rolling plains baked by brutal summer heat and frozen by Siberian winter winds. This is modern-day Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, northern China, the empty heart of the continent. It's so remote that even the Mongols, the greatest horsemen in history, use it mainly as a highway between more interesting places. But this desolate landscape is home to millions of small burrowing creatures, marmots, ground squirrels, gerbils. They live in vast underground colonies, emerging to feed on the tough steppe grasses, constantly alert for eagles and foxes. And in their blood, in their fleas, in their very cells, lives an ancient enemy, Yersinia pestis. This is the plague bacterium, and it is a masterpiece of evolutionary horror. Yersinia pestis is not new in the 1330s. It's been living in these rodent populations for thousands, possibly tens of thousands of years. Most of the time, it exists in a stable, almost peaceful balance with its hosts. The marmots carry it, pass it to each other through flea bites, and life goes on. The steppes are so empty, so far from human civilization, that this arrangement has worked perfectly since the last ice age. But in 1338, something changes. Climate records, preserved in tree rings and ice cores, show that the steppes experience a severe ecological crisis. A multi-year drought devastates the grasslands. The tough steppe grass that usually feeds the rodent populations withers and dies. Suddenly, millions of marmots and ground squirrels are starving. And when animals starve, they move. They migrate. They get desperate. Infected colonies that once lived hundreds of miles from human contact begin pressing closer to the scattered trading outposts along the Silk Road. The fleas, sensing their rodent hosts dying, begin jumping to new victims, including a species they rarely encountered before: humans. The first human beings to die from Yersinia pestis in this pandemic will never be remembered by history. They were probably traders. Maybe a family running a small caravanserai, a rest stop for Silk Road merchants, somewhere in the Tian Shan Mountains. Picture a father and son unloading bales of silk from Bactrian camels, stacking them in a stone warehouse where, unbeknownst to them, a colony of infected ground squirrels has taken refuge from the drought. The fleas don't care that humans aren't their preferred host. They're tiny, mindless vampires driven by a simple program: find warmth, find blood, survive. When they bite, they inject the plague bacteria directly into the human bloodstream. What happens next is a biological nightmare. Yersinia pestis doesn't just infect you, it weaponizes your own immune system against you. The bacteria travel through your lymphatic system to the nearest lymph nodes, usually in your groin, armpits, or neck. There, they multiply at an obscene rate, doubling every few hours. Your lymph nodes, desperately trying to fight the invasion, swell larger and larger. Within 2 to 3 days, they've grown to the size of apples, hard, hot, agonizingly painful lumps called buboes. This is why we call it the bubonic plague. But the bacteria don't stop there. In roughly 60% of untreated cases, the infection enters the bloodstream, septicemic plague. Your blood literally turns toxic. Black patches appear on your skin as blood vessels rupture and tissue dies. Your fingers and toes turn gangrenous, black as charcoal. You're rotting while still alive. And in about 10% of cases, the bacteria reach your lungs. Pneumonic plague. This is the most terrifying form because now you can spread it directly, person to person, through a cough or a sneeze. You don't even need fleas anymore. Just breathing the same air as an infected person can kill you within 24 hours. That first family in the mountains? Dead within a week. But they died in an isolated trading post. A terrible tragedy, but contained. The problem is, they didn't die alone. By 1340, the plague is spreading along the Silk Road like fire through dry grass, and you have to understand, the Silk Road isn't a road. It's a network. It's dozens of different routes, hundreds of caravanserais, thousands of merchants constantly moving. A trader infected in Samarkand might not show symptoms for 3 days. Plenty of time to reach Bukhara and infect 20 more people. Those 20 fan out to Merv, Herat, Tabriz. The Mongol Empire, which has made all this trade possible, is now the perfect delivery system for catastrophe. By 1345, fragmentary reports begin reaching the Mediterranean world. They're confused, terrifying, almost mythological. Italian merchants returning from the east speak of entire cities in India going silent. Persian traders whisper about caravans found in the desert, men, camels, and goods all dead, the cargo rotting under the sun with no one left alive to steal it. A traveler claims that in the lands of Tartary, the dead are so numerous they've stopped burying them and simply stack bodies outside city walls like firewood. Europeans hear these stories in the spice markets of Constantinople, in the counting houses of Venice. And they do what humans always do with distant horror. They compartmentalize. They convince themselves it's exaggeration, foreign superstition, divine punishment for non-Christians. It can't happen here, they think. We're different. We're protected. They have no idea that the same ships bringing them Chinese silk and Indian pepper are already carrying their doom in the bellies of black rats hiding in the cargo hold. And then, in the fall of 1346, the plague reaches a place that will change everything. Kaffa. Kaffa is not just a city, it's a miracle of medieval capitalism. Perched on the eastern edge of the Crimean Peninsula, jutting into the Black Sea, Kaffa is the crown jewel of the Genoese Republic's colonial empire. Imagine a fortified city that looks like it was carved from a single piece of white limestone. Massive walls 30 feet high, studded with towers, surrounding a dense urban core of warehouses, churches, mansions, and narrow streets packed with people from a dozen different cultures. This is where East meets West, where silk from China is unloaded from caravans and loaded onto Genoese galleys bound for Italy, where Russian furs, Persian carpets, and Indian spices change hands for Venetian glass and Flemish wool. The money flowing through Kaffa makes it one of the richest cities in the known world. And in 1346, it's under siege. The Mongol Golden Horde, led by Khan Jani Beg, has surrounded the city with an army estimated at 50,000 men. The reasons are complicated: trade disputes, territorial claims, the usual medieval politics. The Genoese defenders, masters of siege warfare with access to resupply by sea, have settled in for a long stalemate. For months, it's a waiting game. The Mongols can't breach the walls. The Genoese can't drive them away. Soldiers on both sides are bored, frustrated, dying occasionally from arrows or disease or bad water. And then, in the winter of 1346-1347, something changes in the Mongol camp. It starts with the horses. Mongol warriors notice their horses acting strangely, stumbling, frothing at the mouth, collapsing for no apparent reason. Then the grooms who care for the horses fall sick. Then the soldiers sleeping in tents near the horse lines. Within days, it's chaos. Men are dying by the dozens, then the hundreds. They develop massive, painful swellings in their groins and necks. Their skin turns black. They vomit blood. The death is agonizing and fast. Many soldiers go from healthy to dead in less than 48 hours. The Mongol commanders don't understand what's happening. They know about battlefield disease, dysentery, camp fever. But this is different. This is supernatural in its speed and cruelty. Khan Jani Beg watches his unstoppable army, the descendants of Genghis Khan, who conquered half the world, dissolve like morning mist. Thousands are dead. Thousands more are fleeing in terror. The siege is collapsing. And then, in a moment of rage, desperation, and cruel genius, Jani Beg makes a decision that will echo through history. He orders his engineers to load the plague-ridden corpses onto the siege trebuchets. Imagine you're a Genoese crossbowman standing watch on the walls of Kaffa on a cold January morning in 1347. You've been at your post since dawn. The Mongol siege has been going on for months, and honestly, you're starting to think they'll give up soon. You've noticed the enemy camp has been quieter lately. Fewer cooking fires, less activity. Then you hear it, the deep, wooden crack of a trebuchet releasing. You look up, expecting to see the usual boulder arcing through the sky toward the walls. But this isn't a boulder, it's a body. A human corpse, pale and twisted, tumbles through the air and crashes onto a rooftop 50 feet behind you. Tiles shatter. The body splits open on impact. Before you can process what you've just seen, another trebuchet fires, then another, then another. The sky over Kaffa is raining dead men. For 3 days, the Mongols catapult hundreds of plague-ridden corpses over the walls. Bodies smash into the marketplace. They land in narrow alleyways. One crashes through the roof of a church during morning prayers, landing in a grotesque heap in front of the altar. The psychological impact is immediate and devastating. This isn't warfare as the Genoese understand it. This is desecration, blasphemy, horror beyond description. But the biological impact is worse. Soldiers clearing the corpses, civilians fleeing their homes, priests performing last rites. Within 2 weeks, people inside Kaffa start developing the same symptoms that destroyed the Mongol army: the buboes, the black skin, the agonizing death. Panic explodes through the city. The wealthy Genoese merchants of Kaffa didn't become rich by being stupid. They can read the writing on the wall. The Mongols are dying, yes, but so is Kaffa. The plague is inside the walls now, spreading through the cramped quarters like wildfire. Every day, more bodies pile up in the streets. They do what rich people have always done in times of plague. They run. In October 1347, 12 Genoese galleys, sleek warships that double as cargo vessels, load up with refugees, treasure, and trade goods. The captains know the city is doomed. Better to take their chances at sea than wait for death in a plague pit. The ships slip out of Kaffa's harbor just as the Mongol siege finally collapses, not from defeat, but from the death of most of the besieging army. These 12 ships carry perhaps 1,000 people total. merchants and their families, soldiers, crew, priests. They also carry tens of thousands of unnoticed passengers, black rats in the cargo hold, and the fleas on their backs. The galleys point their bows west, toward home, toward the safety of the Mediterranean. They have no idea they've just become the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The port of Messina, Sicily, wakes up to a beautiful autumn morning on October the 1st, 1347. The harbor is already busy at dawn. Fishermen are heading out for the day's catch. Dock workers are unloading a merchant vessel that arrived overnight from Tunis, amphorae of olive oil, bales of North African cotton. The air smells of salt water, fish, and the sweet scent of ripening grapes from the hillside vineyards surrounding the city. Then, around mid-morning, a lookout spots them. 12 ships on the horizon, rowing slowly toward the harbor. Genoese galleys, by the look of them. The distinctive red cross of Genoa visible on their sails. This isn't unusual. Messina is one of the great crossroads of the Mediterranean. Ships from everywhere stop here to resupply, trade, wait out storms. The harbor master sends a small boat out to meet them, to collect the port fees and inspect the cargo. But as the rowing boat gets closer, the men aboard notice something wrong. The Genoese ships are moving too slowly. Their oars aren't synchronized, some rowing frantically, others barely moving. And there's a smell. Even from 100 feet away, the harbor inspectors can smell it, the sweet, rotten stench of death. When they pull alongside the first galley and climb aboard, they find a scene from hell. The deck is a charnel house. Bodies are sprawled everywhere, crew members who died at their posts and were never moved. The few sailors still alive are delirious, covered in sweat, moaning in pain. One man, the ship's navigator, is trying to stand at the helm, but his legs are black from the knees down, the flesh literally rotting off his bones. His armpits have swellings the size of oranges, split open and oozing black fluid mixed with blood. The harbor master, a practical man who's seen plenty of ship-borne disease in his 30 years on the job, makes an immediate decision: get these plague ships out of the harbor. Now. He orders the Genoese galleys expelled from port. Guards are sent aboard to literally cut the mooring ropes before the ships can properly dock. The order goes out. These vessels are not to unload a single piece of cargo, not to let a single person disembark. But he's already too late. Because while the harbor master was inspecting the first ship, the black rats in the cargo hold of the others were doing what rats do: looking for food. And the mooring ropes that briefly connected the ships to the Messina docks? For a rat, those are highways. By the time the Genoese ships are forcibly expelled from the harbor, their diseased crews screaming curses at the Sicilians as they're pushed back out to sea, dozens of infected rats have already scurried onto the docks. The fleas riding those rats are hungry, and Messina's waterfront is crawling with warm-blooded humans. For 3 days, nothing happens. This is the incubation period. The bacteria are multiplying in the blood of the first victims, dock workers, prostitutes who serviced the dying Genoese sailors before the expulsion, merchants who briefly touched contaminated cargo. Then, on October 4th, a grain porter named Michel collapses in the street. His wife finds him that evening, burning with fever, the telltale buboes already swelling in his groin. She calls for a doctor. The doctor examines Michel, prescribes bloodletting, the standard medieval treatment for everything, and leaves. Michel is dead by dawn. His wife, Maria, who spent the night caring for him, wiping his fevered brow, feels the first symptoms 2 days later. She dies on October 8th. Their 3 children, aged 6, 9, and 11, are all dead by October 12th. By October 15th, just 2 weeks after the Genoese ships arrived, Messina is in full panic. The disease is spreading with impossible speed. Families that were healthy on Monday are wiped out by Friday. The city's 4 hospitals are overflowing. Doctors are baffled. Nothing in their medical training, based on the ancient Greek texts of Hippocrates and Galen, has prepared them for this. They try everything: bloodletting, purging, lancing the buboes to drain the evil humors, burning aromatic herbs to purify the air, even having patients drink mixtures of crushed emeralds for the wealthy, or mercury for everyone else. Nothing works. In fact, bloodletting makes it worse. You're weakening patients who desperately need every ounce of strength to fight the infection. By the end of October, Messina's population of 50,000 has lost nearly 15,000 people. The social order begins to collapse. Priests who go to give last rites to the dying contract the pneumonic form of the plague from being in close quarters with victims. They die within days, often right alongside the families they tried to comfort. Churches that were packed with terrified people praying for salvation become infection zones. The pneumonic plague spreading through the congregation with every cough, every shared prayer. The notaries who record wills stop coming to dying people's homes because too many notaries have died. Lawyers refuse to handle inheritance cases. Merchants abandon their shops. And then the real horror begins. People start abandoning the sick. A Sicilian chronicler named Michele da Piazza, one of the few educated men to survive and record what he witnessed, writes something that still chills the blood 700 years later. Fathers abandoned their sick sons. Lawyers refused to come and make the wills of the dying. Friars and nuns were left to care for the sick, but soon they too died. Bodies were left in empty houses, and there was no one who would bury them. Men dug graves for themselves, and when their last hour came, dragged themselves to the grave and covered themselves with earth. Read that again. People were so terrified of contagion that they were burying themselves alive rather than risk their families getting infected from their corpses. By November, Messina has lost half its population. The survivors do the only rational thing left. They flee. Thousands pour out of the city gates, heading for the countryside, for other towns, for anywhere that isn't this nightmare. And with them, in their clothes, in their belongings, in the fleas hiding in the seams of their traveling packs, goes the plague. The refugees from Messina scatter across Sicily like seeds in the wind. A merchant family reaches Syracuse. Within 3 weeks, Syracuse is dying. A priest flees to Catania. Catania falls. A nobleman's household escapes to Palermo on the western coast. Palermo, the jewel of Sicily, a city of 50,000 or one of the most beautiful in the Mediterranean, begins dying in December. But the real catastrophe is the ships. Because while Messina was burning, those 12 Genoese galleys didn't just vanish. They were expelled, yes, but they had to go somewhere. They were filled with dying men desperate to get home. Some of the ships made it back across the Mediterranean to Genoa. They arrived in November 1347, and by December, Genoa, one of the richest, most powerful city-states in Italy, was experiencing the same nightmare as Messina. Other ships stopped at ports along the way. One galley, desperately seeking supplies, docked briefly in Marseille in southern France. The port authorities, having heard rumors of plague ships from the east, tried to quarantine the vessel. But again, the rats don't care about quarantine orders. By January 1348, Marseille is dying. Another ship made it to Venice, the Queen of the Adriatic, the most powerful maritime republic in the world, a city of canals and palaces and 100,000 people packed onto a collection of islands in a lagoon. The Venetians are smarter than most. They're merchants. Practical people who've been trading across the Mediterranean for centuries. They've seen disease before. When reports of the plague start reaching Venice in late 1347, the Great Council, Venice's governing body, holds emergency sessions. They create something unprecedented, the lazaretto. They designate 2 islands in the Venetian lagoon, Lazaretto Vecchio and Lazaretto Nuovo, as quarantine stations. Any ship arriving from infected ports must anchor at these islands. The crew and passengers must stay there for 40 giorni, 40 days, before being allowed into the city. This is where we get the word quarantine. It's a brilliant public health innovation, centuries ahead of its time. In a world that doesn't understand germ theory, that thinks disease is caused by bad air and angry planets, the Venetians have somehow intuited the concept of incubation periods and isolation. And you know what? It actually works. Partially. Venice's death rate, while still catastrophic, is lower than cities that took no precautions. The lazaretto system saves thousands of lives. But saving thousands when tens of thousands are dying is cold comfort. Because by February 1348, the plague is no longer just a problem of port cities. It's broken containment. It's moving inland. Florence in early 1348 is arguably the most beautiful city in Europe. Imagine walking through streets lined with marble palaces. The massive dome of the cathedral, still under construction but already magnificent, dominates the skyline. The Arno River flows through the heart of the city, crossed by elegant bridges lined with goldsmiths' shops. This is the city of Dante, of Giotto, of the Medici banking family, a city of 120,000 people, artists, bankers, wool merchants, scholars. The University of Florence is training the brightest minds in Christendom. The city's banks literally finance kingdoms. Florence is so rich, so cultured, so advanced that its citizens genuinely believe they're living in a new golden age, a rebirth of classical Roman glory. And then, in March 1348, the plague arrives. Giovanni Boccaccio is 35 years old in the spring of 1348, and he's watching his world end. He's a writer, a poet, a man who loves beautiful things, art, music, clever conversation, pretty women. Florence is his city, the place where culture and commerce blend into something magical. He's working on poetry, enjoying life, planning his future. And then the plague comes. Years later, he'll write about what he witnessed in the introduction to his masterpiece, the Decameron. His words are some of the most vivid, haunting descriptions of the Black Death we have. This isn't dry chronicle keeping. This is a man who saw hell on earth and needed to tell someone, anyone, what it was really like. Let me share what Boccaccio saw. The plague doesn't creep into Florence, it explodes. The first cases appear in early March among the poor neighborhoods near the Arno River, crowded tenements where families live stacked on top of each other, where the streets are so narrow 2 carts can't pass, where the gutters overflow with human waste. Within 2 weeks, it's jumped to the wealthy quarters, and this is when Florence realizes something terrifying. Wealth doesn't matter. Status doesn't matter. The plague doesn't care. A nobleman in his marble palazzo dies just as quickly as a beggar in the gutter. Priests die. Doctors die. The city magistrates die. The bankers controlling half of Europe's money die. Boccaccio describes the symptoms with clinical horror. In men and women alike, it first betrayed itself by the emergence of certain tumors in the groin or the armpits, some of which grew as large as a common apple, others as an egg. From these 2 parts of the body, this deadly gavocciolo, bubo, soon began to spread everywhere indiscriminately. After this, the symptoms changed, dark blotches and livid making their appearance on the arms or thighs or any other part of the body. But it's what happens to society that really destroys him. Boccaccio watches Florence transform from a functioning city into a charnel house in a matter of weeks. The first thing that breaks is family, and this, for medieval people, is unthinkable. Family bonds are sacred. You care for your sick relatives even at the risk of your own life. You prepare their bodies for burial. You pray for their souls. These aren't optional. They're the fundamental glue holding society together. But the plague is so terrifying, so obviously contagious, that these bonds simply snap. Boccaccio writes, "Brother was forsaken by brother, nephew by uncle, brother by sister, and oftentimes husband by wife. Nay, what is more, and scarcely to be believed, fathers and mothers were found to abandon their own children, untended, unvisited, to their fate, as if they had been strangers." Think about what he's describing. A mother hears her child coughing in the next room, the deep, wet cough of pneumonic plague, and instead of going to comfort her baby, she flees the house entirely. Leaves the child to die alone in the dark. A husband watches his wife develop the buboes and doesn't call a doctor. He just leaves, walks out the door, and never comes back. This isn't because medieval people were cruel. It's because the terror of infection was so overwhelming that it short-circuited every social instinct they had. And it gets worse. By April, Florence is producing more corpses than it can possibly bury. Under normal circumstances, death in medieval Florence is a highly ritualized affair. When someone dies, the body is washed by family members, dressed in their best clothes, laid out in the home for a wake. Friends and neighbors come to pay respects. A priest performs last rites. The body is carried in a procession to the church, where a funeral mass is held. Then burial in the consecrated ground of the churchyard, with prayers and tears and proper Christian dignity. The plague makes all of this impossible. There are too many dead. There aren't enough priests. Half of them have died already. Families are too terrified to touch the corpses. The graveyards are full. So Florence improvises. The city hires men called bacchini, corpse carriers. These are usually the poorest of the poor, criminals, men with nothing to lose. They're paid shocking amounts of money, when money still means anything, to go door to door, collect the dead, and take them away. Boccaccio describes the scene. Many died daily or nightly in the public streets. Of many others, who died at home, the departure was hardly observed by their neighbors, until the stench of their putrefying bodies carried the news. And what with their corpses and the corpses of others who died on every hand, the whole place was a sepulchre. The bacchini load. Bodies onto carts like firewood. No ceremony, no prayers. Just dump them in and move to the next house. The carts creak through the streets at all hours, the drivers calling out, "Bring out your dead," in a monotone voice. And where do they take them? To the plague pits. The churchyards of Florence are full by mid-April. Every church has a cemetery, and every cemetery is packed to capacity. You can't dig a new grave without hitting the coffin of a recent burial. The smell is indescribable. The sweet, rotten stench of mass decomposition hanging over the city like a fog. So the city digs the pits. Massive trenches are excavated just outside the city walls, 30 feet long, 15 feet wide, 20 feet deep. The bacchini cart the bodies there and just throw them in. Boccaccio is horrified by this. They dug huge trenches in the crowded churchyards, where they laid the bodies as they arrived by hundreds at a time, piling them up tier upon tier as merchandise is stowed in a ship, covering them with a little earth until the trench was full to the top. Bodies stacked like cargo, rich and poor together, indistinguishable in death. No individual graves, no markers, no prayers. In a society where your eternal soul depends on proper Christian burial, this is almost worse than the dying itself. But even this grim efficiency can't keep up. By May, the plague pits are full. New ones are being dug constantly. The city runs out of men willing to dig them. While Florence is drowning in corpses, the doctors are having a complete intellectual breakdown. These are educated men. They've spent years studying at universities, reading Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, the greatest medical minds of antiquity. They understand the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. They can diagnose imbalances. They know when to bleed a patient, when to purge them, which herbs to prescribe. And none of it works. Not a single thing. The University of Paris medical faculty, literally the top doctors in Europe, is asked by the King of France to explain the plague. In October 1348, they issue an official report. Their conclusion? The plague was caused by a triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius on March 20th, 1345. This alignment created a corruption in the atmosphere, miasma, poisonous air rising from the earth. Their recommended treatments: don't bathe. It opens your pores to the corrupted air. Burn sweet-smelling woods to purify the air. Avoid looking at dead bodies. The sight itself can infect you. Don't think about death. Morbid thoughts make you vulnerable. Bloodletting to rebalance the humors. Every single one of these recommendations is either useless or actively harmful. Not bathing means you're covered in flea bites that never get cleaned. Bloodletting weakens patients who desperately need their strength. Gathering in groups to burn incense spreads the pneumonic form faster. The doctors themselves are dying in droves. In Florence, 60% of the city's physicians are dead by summer. The survivors are traumatized, realizing that everything they thought they knew about medicine is wrong. One Florentine doctor named Gentile da Foligno writes a treatise on the plague, desperately trying to find a cure. He experiments with different treatments, carefully recording his results. He dies of the plague in June 1348, mid-research. His final notes, found next to his body, simply say, "I do not know what more to write." By July 1348, Florence has lost approximately 60,000 people, half its population. But numbers don't capture what's really been lost. Boccaccio walks through streets that used to ring with noise, merchants haggling, children playing, the constant hammer of construction. Now, silence. A heavy, oppressive quiet, broken only by the creak of corpse carts and distant crying. The workshops are closed. The markets are empty. The great banking houses of Florence, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, families that literally financed kingdoms, have collapsed because all the bankers are dead. The construction on the cathedral has stopped. The workers are gone. The university is closed. Most of the professors are dead. The orphanages are overflowing with children who watched their entire families die. And here's the thing that really breaks Boccaccio's heart. The city is empty. Not just of people, but of hope, of culture, of the beautiful, vibrant life that made Florence special. He writes, "How many valiant men, how many fair ladies, how many gallant youths, whom even Galen, Hippocrates, or Aesculapius would have pronounced in perfect health, breakfasted in the morning with their kinsfolk, comrades, and friends, and that same night supped with their ancestors in the other world."